Don't look now, but the Philadelphia 76ers are heating up. They have now won back-to-back games over the Charlotte Hornets and Dallas Mavericks and received some positive news about the latest on Joel Embiid and his potential return to the team. In this video, I want to break down exactly what that means, the latest on what we're hearing, and how this all might be paving the way for a perfect playoff run for this Sixers team. So let's dive right in, and I'm going to begin with the update here. This was revealed during the broadcast on ESPN between the Sixers and the Mavericks, and this quote here: first off, Philadelphia 76ers star Joel Embiid is making progress in his return from a left knee injury. According to ESPN's Katie George on the game broadcast, the reigning MVP has, quote, started on-court workouts and began lifting 100% of the weight he lifted prior to the injury, with an update from the team expected soon. Embiid suffered a significant meniscus injury that required surgery on February 6th with an initial reevaluation timeline of 4 weeks. So that is great news. The fact that he's back on the floor, that is something that we have not heard from either the Sixers or publicly anyone in Joel Embiid's camp whatsoever. And while this has been painted with a fairly optimistic brush throughout regarding his potential return to the floor, that is the first kind of concrete news that we have about him being back on the floor already. And for this happening at such a quick rate, I think is a great sign. Now, the Sixers have been super secretive about all this, that they're keeping all the information very close to the vest on what the expectations are, what the situation is. So I wanted to break down a little bit of what we do know. This news does change the picture quite a bit. And I wanted to point out the difference in timelines between the surgeries, which of course has not really been publicly recognized by the Sixers here. But the uncomplicated meniscectomy, which is what we are presuming Joel Embiid has, you're allowed to bear weight right away with pain as tolerated. In contrast, the meniscus repair surgery would keep him out from 0 to 6 weeks. So with that information alone, we can pretty much assume that he did have the first option here, the one with the quicker recovery. And we're seeing the other options. We see walk without crutches, 2 to 7 days. We already have video proof of Joel Embiid moving about, which is great to see that he's been on the sideline for games. There's options to drive, 1 to 2 weeks to regain full motion, and the return to heavy work or sports, 4 to 6 weeks if you have regained motion and strength and your knee is not swollen or painful. So that is all great news, meaning that Joel Embiid has essentially checked these boxes already. And again, I did mention that there was an optimistic view throughout. But I wanted to pull up this quote from Brian Windhorst, which occurred initially right after the Joel Embiid surgery, and it said, quote, I think Joel Embiid had a portion of his meniscus removed that would enable him to return. I think that was absolutely always on the table from the moment they completed the surgery. The 76ers went out and they added at the trade deadline with Buddy Hield, specifically because they were planning on having Embiid back. When Embiid, if and when he returns, if it's late March or if it's early April or whatever, and he comes back out there and he's looking like pre-injury form, I think the Sixers have a chance to threaten everyone out of the East. Windy is absolutely right about this, and we're beginning to see some signs of life from this team past Joel Embiid, that we're seeing Tobias Harris step back, regain form, look like a competent basketball player for the first time in weeks. We're seeing what Kyle Lowry is adding to the Sixers team, that having him as a decision maker in this offense, just a true adult running the show and a guy who has far more left in the tank than I initially gave it credit, I am thrilled to see. That we're beginning to see these Sixers rip off a couple wins. As I mentioned, the back-to-back wins against the Hornets and Mavericks, and then looking ahead, matchup against the Brooklyn Nets and the Memphis Grizzlies for the next two. Those are both winnable games there. And this Sixers team cannot afford to let any of the winnable games slip. That we know what the situation is with Joel Embiid, how difficult it has been throughout his career to win without him. That with just this season specifically, the Sixers are 26-8 with Joel Embiid, but just 9-17 without it. And you can see the difference beyond just the win percentage, going from 76.5% with the MVP down to 34.6% without him. You can see it in these stats as well, that from 121.4 points per game to 111.6 points per game, the rebounding going down, the assist numbers going down, the steals, everything across the board is just not the same with Joel Embiid in it. And again, that is no secret that when you're the MVP of the league, when you're the best player on the team, they're obviously going to be a better team with you. But when you look ahead to this schedule, and this is why these next couple games are so important, is there is a tough stretch. That dealing with this without Joel Embiid is going to be tough. That you look past the Nets and Grizzlies, that you have the New Orleans Pelicans, who are playing some really good basketball right now, back-to-back against the New York Knicks, who are a tough-as-nails team. We will see what the injury update is on Jalen Brunson, who had to leave the game against the Cavaliers last night. Then the Milwaukee Bucks, we'll get to see that in action. Another matchup against the Hornets, which will be a must-win. The Miami Heat, who are rounding into form. The Phoenix Suns, the Los Angeles Clippers. The brutal stretch here. Lakers, Clippers, Kings, Clippers, Cavs, Raptors is a winnable game. The Thunder, the Heat, the Grizzlies, the Spurs, the Detroit Pistons, Orlando Magic, and Brooklyn Nets. That is not an easy path for the remainder of the season, which is why I do think it's a big deal that they pulled off the team victory against the Dallas Mavericks. Now, I did want to talk a little more specifically about Joel Embiid's timeline, that we had this laid out when the initial surgery did occur. Shout out to Philly Sixers Galaxy here on Twitter. Some days to keep in mind with Joel Embiid's expected recovery timeline. Obviously, the All-Star break has passed. 4 weeks from today was March 6th, which is now 2 days away. 6 weeks would be March 19th. 8 weeks would be April 2nd, and the start of playoffs is April 20th. Now, obviously, the Sixers should not be trying to rush Joel Embiid back by any means. But if he's healthy, then you let the guy play, and he absolutely can aid in staying afloat, winning some of these games. That the Sixers, for the most part, have been fine. That they are surviving. They still currently sit in the top 6 seed, still are escaping the play-in tournament, but there is no doubt that there are teams on their heels. The Pacers, the Heat, these teams are coming, and they are trying to win games with a far easier route from here. But when you bring in the really optimistic outlook that Joel Embiid can come back, the picture changes. That this is now the Sixers can take any team on a night-to-night basis. And if they do have to gut out some tough victories, then they have to gut out some tough victories. And Joel Embiid can absolutely help with that. But I'm also more of the mindset of get a ticket into the dance, and you never know what happens from there. That even if this team slips down to the play-in game, I would prefer that not happen by a major extent. But if you do have to face one of these top seeds in the East, go through the play-in process, there's not a single team in the NBA that wants the Sixers team with a healthy Joel Embiid in the first round of the playoffs. And again, this is the overly optimistic just mindset here, that there's a chance where Joel just does not look like himself when he returns to the floor, and that would be a huge bummer for the Sixers team and ultimately change everything. But for now, the chips are in the middle. That is beyond the Sixers and Joel's real control. That how his rehab process is going, how sharp he looks, that is fully between what is happening between those walls. That we will see with our eyes when he steps back on the floor. But the thing that I like to point out there when people are pessimistic about that is Joel Embiid is a guy who has more experience dealing with knee issues, dealing with injuries than just about any player in the NBA. That this is a guy that rarely is near 100%, that he's played through a ton, and even this season, it's now become made public through a variety of sources that this wasn't an injury that was a one-time thing. This wasn't just Jonathan Kuminga fell on his knee and that was the meniscus tear. That was the breaking point that was aggravating it to a further extent, but that is something that he's been dealing with for several weeks and really the whole season. I know there was a quote from Pat Bev on the Pat Bev podcast talking about how he was giving people 40 points in 3 quarters because that's all he got, that they were doing all these sprays on his knee. He was living in the trainers. He was trying to find a way to fight through. And the good news is that that issue is now addressed. He has taken a backseat, and hopefully he will be as close to 100% as possible for Joel Embiid. I've also seen some complaints about the fitness level and theorizing that he's likely not going to be at 100% from a stamina, just being in shape. And that is a tough card to be dealt. That we know there's not a ton that Joel could have done about that. But the bottom line is the best route for everyone here is for him to make sure the recovery process is complete, to stay off his feet, make sure that it is healing properly. That is more important. But I get it, that there's no doubt he's not a guy that has had the finest level of fitness throughout his career, that we know that there are some inherent problems or more difficulties with being 7'2", 300 pounds, that it's not as easy to be able to run around like you're Ish Smith on a night-to-night basis. But for Joel Embiid, he's a guy that even not at 100%, you feel his impact out there. That things will absolutely change from a gravity standpoint on the offensive end, the way that defenses are focused in on Joel Embiid, and on the defensive side of things, his paint presence, the ability that he has from a rebounding standpoint that this team could use right now. There's a lot that he adds that he does not quite have to be at 100% to make an impact. Now, are the Sixers winning a championship without Joel Embiid at 100%? Likely not. But what is still on the table here is when we circle back to this timeline here. Say he comes back in 6 weeks, in March 19th. And at that point in the schedule, in March 19th, again, this is a pretty optimistic view, but they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 games remaining at that point in time. Now, I don't think Joel Embiid has a night-to-night performance at that point. I think it's likely he plays every other, sits out back-to-backs, maybe even they're definitely going to be overly cautious with making sure that is the case. But that is a fair amount of ramp-up time. And maybe it takes longer than that. Maybe they delay that 5 more games, push it to like the 8-week margin, and he can close out from there. But to me, that's a decent sample size to begin playing himself into shape. And when you look at some of these playing teams, there shouldn't be a team that the Sixers should be fearful of. That the Orlando Magic? No way. Toronto Raptors? Please. There's plenty of options that this team can absolutely rip through. And I feel pretty good about the odds that this is a Sixers-focused issue, that their level of play will dictate their ceiling as a team. Joel Embiid's health will completely correlate to how far this team can go. But at this point in time, all signs are pointing in the right direction. That it does sound like he is much closer to returning the floor than I think most of us would have expected at this point in time. That I do think while they're still being secretive, while all the news is still being kept close to the vest, it would not surprise me if we begin to see some leaked practice footage of Joel Embiid doing some stuff. If we start seeing him on the floor with his teammates, and the amount that he has already been around this team during the process, stuff like sitting on the bench during games, stuff like being present at practice, that only reinforces my belief that he is returning to this team. So for the Sixers fans that have packed up the season, that were too worried when that injury did happen, time to bring out a little hope again, that I do believe this team has a fighting chance. We will see how the pieces fully fit together, but it's very clear to me that everyone on this roster is purely built to play next to Joel Embiid. Guys like Buddy Hield are going to be far more dangerous with the superstar on the floor. Nico Batum is going to be a far more useful basketball player when you have a player like Joel Embiid to pair him with. So I'm optimistic and excited about this way this roster has shaped together. I'm feeling extremely optimistic about the chance of Joel Embiid coming to the floor, and I'm even more thrilled that we're getting these type of news beginning to come out. Appreciate you guys for tuning into this video. I am very excited about the outlook for Joel Embiid and the Sixers from here. Make sure you are smashing that subscribe button to keep tabs on everything on Sixers Digest as we begin to maneuver towards this playoff push. Make sure you're dropping a like and any comments you have below, and I'll be talking with you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.